Wonder Boy Monster World was a lovely little action title for the Sega Genesis released in 1991. It was developed once again by Westone and published by Sega. I won't go into the weird title confusion of the series for this video, but this game marks the 5th entry in the Wonder Boy series and the 3rd in the Monster World series. You play as Cheyenne as he sets off on another mission to save Monster World from an invading army of monsters. I'm not sure why a place named Monster World is worried about an army of monsters, but it is what it is. Cheyenne's end goal is to defeat the evil Biomecha, and he'll have to get through several dungeons and face some big challenges along the way. You'll travel from your cute little home across the Monster World Sea and visit such exotic locales as Alcedo the Fairy Village, Purapril, which is the main capital, Lilypad the Dwarf Village, Chilljam the Dark World, and Begonia the Dragon Village. Of course, you'll also spend plenty of time in more standard areas like an ocean and a desert. These areas are where you'll buy items such as potions and weapons and have a chance to talk to villagers to find out more about the story and your next task. They also act as little mini hubs leading you to the next part of the story, some hidden areas, and even eventually unlocking other doors that help you move around from distant areas a lot more quickly. Much like the previous 2 titles in the series, more on those another time, I'm comfortable calling this an action RPG, but that has one large asterisk for some people. There isn't really any experience points with level progressions and the power increases that come with those. Technically, almost everything you need is available as soon as you start the game, but the things holding you back is story progression and cold hard cash. Coins basically take the place of experience points, and Monster World, even in a crisis, is plagued by capitalism. Much like any traditional RPG, you'll spend plenty of time grinding to raise your power, but here it is so you can grab coins to buy the best weapons and armor. Of course, you also need that gold for healing and magic items, making reloading areas and respawning monsters to grab more coins a necessary task. Of course, some items are found after a series of tasks or just part of the story progression, and your health is expanded mostly by finding chests and hearts in them. You can't just keep grinding in the first part of the game and then walk into the first store and request a set of legendary items, but you'll never get any stronger in regards to attack or defense without having better items, and most of those are purchased, which is why there is an asterisk. Not exactly an uncommon concept in the 16-bit and 8-bit generation, after all, this is post-Legend of Zelda, and the same genre discussion has always existed for that series as well. If you ever played any of the Monster World games, even the newest remake or spiritual sequel on Switch, a lot of this probably sounds or looks familiar, and you're not mistaken. The Monster World series has a habit of riffing on the same locations, enemies, story, and concepts in general. You could call that lazy, but it's more of a consistency. They all are supposed to be a connected story after all, and it oddly doesn't make each game feel recycled. Think of it more of how you know what to expect in a classic Super Mario game, because Mario is Mario, while Monster World is always Monster World. Through your journey in Monster World, Cheyenne will come across an interesting cast of enemies from the simple crab, snake, and mushroom to the more impressive Cyclops, skeleton, or other variety of warriors. Some of them will just bump into you to inflict damage, but plenty have some sort of weapon or projectile. To fight them, Cheyenne has a very basic set of attacks and defense. You can slash with your sword, jump and slash, use magic, and defend with your shield. Cheyenne's attack is very basic and has a very small reach, so it is very easy to be hit while you're trying to attack if you aren't careful, especially with larger enemies. This is something that I feel like can be adapted to fairly easily, and only a few enemies seem to take advantage of your handicap. Defense, on the other hand, is broken for a lot of situations. That shield simply does not work consistently enough. You don't actually do anything with your shield, it is just the idea that when you aren't attacking, your shield is up. Against an enemy with a very straight-on projectile or one also wielding a sword, that can work fine. But if there is any arc to the attack, it is all luck. Sometimes things clink right off that shield, and others, it's like that shield doesn't even matter. The biggest issue, which is just a standard mechanic of the Monster World series, but still worth noting, is the knockback when hit and the kind of weird invincibility frames. So get used to being juggled a bit if you get overwhelmed, and especially by the larger bosses. Magic can be very handy, but I think less so here compared to the previous entries. I almost always ignore it, which makes things much harder in the end, as you suddenly almost need magic to complete the game, when most situations prior can easily be handled with just your sword. You have Firestorm, Thunder, which is actually just an electric attack, and Quake. More useful for most of the game are the 2 power-ups, Strength and Shield, which do exactly what they sound like they do. You'll also need to get a power called Return, which can be used to teleport you to your last save point. You increase your magic again, not by leveling up, but by finding more magic items in chests or by buying them. This entry in the series introduced companions. In each main village, you'll have the opportunity to take a little friend along for a bit. While super adorable, some are more useful than others. The little fairy from Alcedo will find you hearts, but doesn't really do much else. They seem to attack the enemies, but nothing really happens. In Lilypad, you'll rescue a dwarf and gain them as a companion. They will find you coins, and to move the story along, they're the only way to break open the door to the dungeon in that village. Shabo shows up for the ice temple, and they throw scythes at enemies, and the most helpful is our little dragon friend who will breathe fire constantly at any baddie that dares get in your way, and it seems like a very strong attack. Though there are some areas you'll travel in to find secrets and grind for those sweet coins I mentioned earlier, the meat of the game takes place in a few dungeons where you'll face the more challenging enemies, solve a few puzzles, find any story items, and fight the bosses. Starting with the very simple and straightforward Alcedo village in the cave, you'll find yourself going through each one of these villages as the starting point for each new dungeon. Each new section does attempt to ramp up the difficulty in some way, from just adding traps and winding past to more varied and tougher enemies to fight. Some are a little inconsistent, with being a little more linear than you would expect, or the enemies just seem kind of easy, while others go the opposite direction and can be brutal to get through. A good example of this is when you're trying to find Poseidon. His lair is a big complex maze, but outside of being just long and confusing, you can swim past most of the enemies with ease, making the only challenge to just not screw up too many times before the next time you can save, because you certainly don't want to do this again. Opposite of this is the Volcano, which is an area that shrinks you down and has you battle some very persistent enemies who are now even harder to hit due to your size, all while constantly traversing over lava pits. If it wasn't for your companion, this would almost be impossible to get through. All but two areas have a boss, some of the best and worst parts of the game. The design on some of the bosses is great, with large sprite work and lots of details and personality, but a few a little more plain. First is the Mycondid, a giant version of the mushrooms you've seen prior to this, easy to beat, with the hardest part being its size and how it jumps around when hit. Second is the highly annoying Grag and Glag. These two rock creatures have their own hit points and spit out these giant rolling rocks while shooting tiny pebbles if you try to stay out of the way on the top platform. Everything is just difficult to avoid since your jump is weak and your defense is touchy. I just don't like these type of bosses. It isn't as much skill as taking a few tries to make it work in your favor. Third is the Ice Palace, which has two sub-bosses you need to defeat to collect gems. If you go in powered up, it's not a bad situation, but the stiff platforming here and the slippery ice can make for a bad time. The main boss, the Ice Bomber, is also a bit annoying simply because he moves quickly to the right and you're constantly trying to run towards them to slash their head on the very slippery ice. Ice areas were never the most fun during this era. Fourth, there's the Tyrant Dragon, which surprisingly immediately drops in difficulty compared to the dungeon leading up to them, though still a fun fight. The two sections without a boss is Poseidon's Lair. Once you find Poseidon, he just wants to have a little chat, and the Pyramid, which has the Sphinx. The Sphinx just wants to ask you a few questions. The only way to die is to answer only one or none correctly, and if you get only two right, you have to go back through the pyramid. More than that, you'll just get another try until you answer at least 4 correctly. Now for the finale of the game, part 1 of 2. Be warned, if you want to experience any of the ending story from here, it'll be big spoiler territory. I know sometimes that is weird to worry about for such an old game, but I do understand if you want some surprises if you've never played the game. Skip ahead a bit to get the wrap up and miss the ending. For the finale, you'll be off to the Dark Castle to face off against the Demon King. This is a great dungeon, for the most part. It is challenging in a good way and has new enemies and a bit of an homage to the Dragon's Trap. Now that slight hesitation there is because of this one platforming section. This just plain sucks. Your jump is just too stiff for these type of moving platforms, and if you fall, you have to refight this mini-boss you passed to get up here. Not exactly a good time. The Demon King is one chaotic fight, as each head comes off to show a new form. He is large and broad, so you're going to get hit real easily when you're trying to hit him. That bounce back and juggle does you no favors either. After After a bit of a story twist when you defeat the Demon King, you'll need to head to the actual ending, in space. Not even kidding. You head into a spaceship and blast off into space to fight the actual bad guy I mentioned earlier, Biomecha. This is a very straightforward ending that a lot of games of this era like to do, a boss rush. You are so powered up by now, this is cake. Even better, if you do manage to get injured, the little laser guys in the hallways will give you hearts to buff you back up. Biomecha is actually kind of a letdown for a final boss. As bombastic as the Demon King was, there was at least a little more personality there. Biomecha just sits there and lasers fly all around the room. Magic and good magic is basically needed to make it through. At least it has a fun little cutscene where the prince comes in to shred his stuff. Wipe the floor with Biomecha and get your story wrapped up in a neat little bow. What a ride. Wonder Boy in Monster World is a fun little game. It has problems and honestly didn't do enough coming off of the Dragon's Trap. It also is just a bit slow and stiff, but it's still a gem for the Sega Genesis. The sprite work is great, especially on the bosses with their large size and detail, and the art direction is just good in general. Fun character designs and the themes are well made, from bright, colorful beach areas to dark, foreboding castles. The music, composed by Shinichi Sakamoto, is fantastic, as well as carrying over some classic tracks from previous entries. It may not be the most epic or dense music, but the music of the Wonder Boy series has always been really fun and catchy, and this is no exception. The story is cute, and the little characters, despite not providing much interaction, have a surprising amount of personality. Honestly, if you're a fan of side-scrolling action games with a little RPG flavor, the Monster World games are just fun, and this is no exception. If you don't want to hunt down the original cartridge, which averages from a little under 30 to a little over 50 as of this video, it's on several compilations and digital services. It's certainly worth paying 99 cents for it on Steam if nothing else.